All right. So, wait, I hear myself. Let me quickly. Oh, yeah, it was yours. Yeah. So before we start with the second part, where you can get feedback on your progress, especially from Carlo, but also, of course, if you have any questions for myself, then we can do that in the second part. But before we do so, I just want to give a quick rundown again of the project, especially based on sort of this slide that you have seen, but just the overall project for this second part of the minor. So first of all, like this is a very academic, research-heavy approach that you might not be familiar with as much, right? And that is fair, and that is of course also something that we consider, right? So this is not like a doctoral thesis or anything, and we don't have those requirements. But so let me give you a quick idea of what it is that you're supposed to do and what it is that you're supposed to have at the end of the second project. So on the 26th, I think is the presentation session. So you start off by having some questions, something that you investigate, right? We discussed this before. So let's imagine that you're really interested in the sort of demographics of people shown harvesting fruit or something, right? So if that is the rough question that you want to investigate, then you would start by collecting the data that you will end up analyzing, right? So for example, you then go to TikTok, you try and figure out which hashtags, which search terms, etc., are useful to get those images. You will end up with a spreadsheet where you can filter out a bunch of hashtags, right? So for example, the For You page stuff, which you often see on TikTok, just get rid of that so that eventually you have a subset of only videos, for example, showing people harvesting fruit on some plantation, right? So that is the basis. And then you can really start getting more into the analysis of that. Um, and while you're doing so, also keep in mind sort of what the result of that is going to be. So the image grid, as Carlo mentioned, you can really see as like a sort of, I like the window and analogy of really getting a better idea of what that data set contains, right? Is it mostly like small scale idealized farms of, like a rural family that has like three banana palms or something? Or is it large scale agriculture, etc., right? And when you have a bit of idea of maybe a theme that is starting to get clearer and clearer, for example, let's say that what you see on TikTok is this idealized version of small scale, happy family harvesting the couple of fruit trees that they have, right? Then you could focus on sort of specific aspects of that and for the supercut. So for example, you can focus on the emotions and make a supercut of like the people smiling while they happily collect their two apple trees or something, right? So that is basically how you have a question. So how is this farming process of exotic fruit, for example, how is that shown? You narrow down the data set, do the first initial analysis, try and figure out sort of what interesting points are, what themes are, like demographics of people shown or emotions that are sort of communicated, let's say, and then you can start getting into the deliverables. That is basically the overall approach. So that in the end, you will then be able to draw, for example, a conclusion that, if I keep using the same example, that on TikTok, this harvesting, farming process of, for example, fruit is very idealized. You only see happy families that harvest like locally grown fruit. And for example, then in your conclusion, you can reflect on that and contrast that with the fact that like 90+% of fruit and vegetable, etc., is like harvested by minimum wage workers in very bad working conditions, etc., right? Similarly, if you want to focus on the emotions, for example, if it is not just small scale local farms, but big industrial farming things, and they show like the happy workers smiling there, you could contrast that with like just the working conditions. Right, just to give you sort of one example of how this project looked like. And that's why in the first two workshops, You have the first workshop where you learn this initial step, like how do you collect this data set? How do you sort of discover these potential themes or topics that you could further investigate? In the second workshop, you learn how do you visualize them. And then what we're going to do in the third workshop is how can you use web scraping to combine information with what you already have here. So for example, again, the fruit farming example, then in the third workshop, we will look into how you can web scrape information on like, let's say things like the biggest food producers and like working condition scandals there or something, right? So that at the end, at the 26th, you can give a whole presentation on this process, how you did it, why you did it, etc. You can show your 3 or more deliverables, and you can sort of draw conclusions about, for example, the disconnection between the idealized representation on TikTok of working on farms and the actual truth that you can scrape in workshop 3. So that is the overall approach. Yeah, just to sort of ease your mind that it's not all that overwhelming, hopefully. Are there any questions about this overall approach? All right, then you can start experimenting with what you've seen today, but also just continue your work on the project. Carlo and I are here for any questions, so please let us know. All right. With one more person online, Adelina, Carlo will talk to you in a second and discuss your process. I will stop the recording now.